A retirement fund meant to assist Malaysians in their golden years. What to do when one struggles in the current economic situation? The next question is, are there enough savings for old age? And how to increase contributions and savings instead of pushing for withdrawals? I'm Azaria Tagaya, and this is Money Matters. Hello and good evening. Thanks for taking the time to be with us once again on Money Matters. In the studio today, we have the Chief Executive Officer of the nation's largest pension fund, the Employees Provident Fund, EPF, Datuk Sri Amir Hamzah Azizan. Hello, Datuk Sri. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Azura. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. All right, Datuk Sri, now let's start off with some of the recent news. So the EPF just a few days ago, they finalized the mechanism for using Account 2 savings as support for loan applications. Now, but let's take a look at the bigger scenario here facing consumers. First of all, we have contributors, all Malaysians really, who have a need to preserve their savings for their old age, for later in life, for when they're really going to need those savings. But at the same time, you also have those who are in need of financial aid. So do you see the EPF savings to support loans as the best solution to actually balance between these two needs of consumers?
I think we have to go back in time. If you look at EPF's mandate is actually to help Malaysians, and especially our members, to build a nest egg so that by the time they retire, they've got enough to move on in life, and live a comfortable life. During this COVID period, it was an unusual circumstance. And in that unusual circumstance, EPF allowed 4 withdrawals along the way. But since the reopening up of the economy, we've seen the economy come back stronger. We've seen employment come down. The wage levels in the countries have also come up to a better form. So we have transitioned to a different stage. Therefore, in these circumstances, we believe that it's important for EPF to go back to its core mandate, which is to help Malaysians build the base saving that they need by the time they retire. This is because it's important, because if we don't do it now, we'll get to a point that will reach a precipice that we can't come back from. And then we'll leave the country into a retirement crisis at that point. So when you look at the scheme that's been designed with the government, the idea is to help people who are in that transition phase by using what they have in the Account 2 to support access to loans that banks could provide. And in that facility that's been put out, banks have offered to give loans at a cheaper rate than normal personal financing were. So by coming and using these schemes, our members get access to loan rates between 4 to 5%. It's important, however, the member understands what he's doing. He's taking a loan that needs to be repaid. He needs to assess his capacity to support the payment so that he can maintain good capacity to move on in life. But it addresses a liquidity crunch that may exist at this time.
I see, indeed. Now, we're going to talk more about that and also financial literacy among consumers. How important is it for them to actually understand what the EPF actually stands for? It's a fund for your retirement age. But before that, we also want to talk a little bit about the dividend that you announced recently. For 2022, the EPF declared a 5.35% dividend for conventional savings and 4.75% for Sharia savings. Now, could you tell us a little bit about that? What's behind this dividend gap?
If you look at the Sharia scheme was introduced by EPF in 2017. So we're in the 6th year of inception, from inception. And we created the Sharia scheme to help our Muslim members to be able to save according to what the faith demands. A fund that looks after the type of investment it actually does, that complies with the rules that the religion requires to. So when EPF created this scheme, it had to establish rules in terms of what type of asset that it can invest in that fully complies with that. Because of that, what we have is our investments are a subset of what a universal investment capacity is. So since inception, we have grown our Sharia portfolio. The total asset base that we have under Sharia definition is about 400 billion. Out of that 400 billion, about 100 billion is actually used under the Sharia scheme. So when you understand that, then you understand that the challenge for EPF is then to manage it so that it has the capacity to invest in the right asset base, yeah, with the right instruments to give a good blended return to the savers. And our challenge at the moment is that the depth of the Sharia market is still developing.
Yeah.
So over the years, what EPF also does is actually try to create instruments that will comply with Sharia along the way, so we can create a better return base. What we are also committed to do is to split the Sharia fund away from the conventional fund. Because at the moment we manage the fund as an integrated whole, whereby the conventional fund also enjoys returns from the Sharia fund. So by splitting it up, we allow both assets to follow what the risk appetite actually is, and allows the asset to be created to return better rates using instruments that you can put in.
Fantastic, Dato' Sri. Now, we also want to ask you a little bit about the low savings of contributors. This has been mentioned in the past as well. Is there any way that we can actually remedy this situation? Is the EPF working on anything at the moment, perhaps with the Finance Ministry?
I think when you look at the low savings in EPF by our members, we need to go back to the root issue that actually exists. Today, our members contribute based on deductions from their salary, 11% by the member, and either 12 or 13% by the employer, and that forms the basis of the contribution. But it's actually attached to what is your base salary that you actually get. And the challenge that we actually have is generally in Malaysia, salary levels are generally low. So although the contribution rate is good, but if salary base is low, then your net saving is actually low.
Yeah.
So if I look at my data today, about 44% of EPF's membership, base salary today is below 2,000 ringgit. So that's one challenge. 81% of my membership salary base is below 5,000 ringgit. So what we need to do as a country is look at enhancing roles so that we can pay the worker a much more better wage and hopefully moving towards a living wage. So I think that's one root problem that we actually have. Second is the nation is also moving towards a lot more informal sector. The gig economy is becoming bigger, and we find our members moving in and out of formal employment, informal employment. So when they're in the formal sector, they get contributions into EPF. When they stop and they move to the informal sector, the contributions stop. So this inconsistency of payment results in challenges of building a good enough nest egg. So if I look at my 15.7 million members, only about 8.7 million of them are active, which means they contributed once in the last 1 year.
I see.
So what we have to do now is encourage and get them back into the system, contributing and building that nest egg. So those are two things that I think is very important. Of course, the third thing that is probably one that has been more recently a challenge for us is the 4 withdrawals that occurred. So 145 billion ringgit left the EPF because the members withdrew it, and actually another 10 billion ringgit through reduction of contribution rates. So that has also had a significant impact to people's savings.
Well, one of the ways that we can actually ensure consumers manage their money well and also have enough savings for the future is also through financial literacy, of course, and we're going to touch about that after this. But Dato' Sri, it's time for us to go for a short break right now. Don't go anywhere. Money Matters is going to be back after the break. You're still with us on Money Matters, and we're joined this week by EPF CEO, Datuk Sri Amir Hamzah Azizan, right here in the studio. Well, Datuk Sri, before the break, we talked about low savings for contributors. What about the issue of the over-reliance on migrant workers? How does that actually come into the mix?
I think the challenge for the nation is actually to be able to migrate and create a lot more valuable, stronger quality jobs in the country. So when we are dependent on migrant workers and low-wage migrant workers, artificially what we do is suppress wage levels in the country.
Yeah.
So I think the country needs to be looking at how we can upgrade jobs in the country. Even the most menial sort of job levels that exist, if you apply innovation, automation and so on, you can re-engineer the jobs to a level that we can pay a wage that's commensurate, that the locals would want to come and work.
How would you propose this be done?
Say, for example, if you've got jobs in the plantation sector, for example, and we use a lot of manual labor to do very, very basic things. Spray herbicide, clean the roads and so on like that, pick the fruits and so on. But by adding automation, by adding drones along the way, we can create new jobs that do more and more efficient, that can displace a lot of migrant workers, but use locals at high level job. So a drone operator can command a higher base salary. So if in that process we remove 4 or 5 or 6 foreign workers, we can pay the differential in rate to the local worker. That in essence, we drive the country's wage levels up. And not at the expense of returns from the corporation that's running it also.
Indeed, fantastic.
So that's a nice balance that we have to work towards.
Yes, it is. Perhaps that's something we're going to be looking at in the near future. All right, so we were talking about financial literacy. It's really important for consumers and contributors to actually understand what the EPF stands for. So how can the EPF assist in terms of increasing the financial literacy of consumers, its contributors?
I think financial literacy is at the heart of what we need to get in the country. Right, yeah, and part of the things that EPF actually does is we do outreach programs to members, whereby we go out and we explain what is a retirement, what you should be doing in retirement, how to calculate and think about numbers along the way. And the more we do this, and the earlier we engage in students and the early workers along the way, we can convert them to become much more financially literate. And we teach them very, very basic concepts. Like, for example, if you've got a salary, before you start spending other things, put aside 20% of your salary for things that you say, these are emergency funds.
Yeah, savings.
Then, yes, basic savings. And the rest you can spend, it's okay. Yeah? But if you've created that instinct along the way, over time what you have is a much more secure base for your own self. And unfortunately, I think in today's age, we tend to forget the very, very basics. When I was young, the first thing my parents actually did was they brought me to the bank. Says, you can choose, what do you like? Do you want a tabung with a lion inside it?
Exactly.
Or do you want a tabung with a camel?
I remember that very clearly, actually, yeah.
I think today we've forgotten to teach our kids to do that same thing. And so kids haven't learned back to put it back. So outreach program is one thing.
Yes.
The second thing, when they are already an employer, earner, they've got savings in EPF, and they come to us, we provide financial advice services. So we can teach the individual how he wants to do. And when you come to the point of retirement, they come in, and before we say you can take the money out, we move them to our financial advice service and say, look, you've got a choice. The fund allows you to take it out, but we would recommend that you take it out in bits. Every month you take out 1,000 ringgit or something like that. Leave the fund inside, because it will earn a dividend and it compounds on itself. So you will get more for a longer period. So active intervention when a person wants to do something actually facilitates. Then the combination of working together with Bank Negara, the banks and all, to lift financial education in the country will also do a lot of things.
All right, so advising, you actually have a form of counseling, so to speak, to help your contributors. Now let's talk more about the EPF. Now, with global uncertainty expected to actually go on until 2024, what are EPF's plans to ensure better dividends for 2023?
I think dividends, you have to look at it in terms of the investing environment once. And I think EPF has done pretty well during this period, especially if you look at what we've done last year during a very, very turbulent time. Nobody expected the Ukraine-Russian conflict to go on, and the knock-on effect with inflation, and then subsequently central banks' intervention by driving up interest rates and so on. Massive effects to the financial sector. Yet EPF was able to deliver the returns that was demanded of it. And I think part of it is because we have a very, very strong strategic asset allocation methodology, where we are very disciplined in terms of where we put money in, how we do, and what the risk-reward balance that we want to try to achieve. So this year is no different than how we would behave in this environment, because fundamentally we are a long-term investor. We invest people's money for their retirement age, and periodically the people take it out, but a small portion of our people take out at one time.
Yeah.
Therefore, we have the luxury to ride the cycles. So while short-term returns may be a challenge for immediate gain, but buying in a market that is low is actually very, very useful for the long-term fund. So what we've got, because we have the series of investment that we've done, some early investments are allowed to be realized today. While today we can buy in at cheap rates for longer term. Yeah? And our asset allocation then moves to manage risk in a better form. So today, about 45% of my investments are in fixed income. That gives me a stability, secure return for members. About 35% or so, 37 is in equity. That gives me the alpha, the upside that can come in. So we manage that in a better form. And we look at the private markets for a better return also. Whether that's real estate, infrastructure, private equity, it gives me better returns. So one of the key things that we're doing now is moving funds across and picking the right time that they could come in into that right asset class.
I see. Well, Dato' Sri, we have lots more to talk about, but it's time for us to take another short breather. Money Matters will be back after this with the CEO of EPF. Don't go anywhere. Thanks so much for staying with us on Money Matters. We are still with the Chief Executive Officer of the EPF, Datuk Sri Amir Hamzah Azizan. Now, Datuk Sri, tell us a little bit about EPF's overseas investments. How are you managing that, and are there any plans to perhaps increase your assets?
As part of my strategic asset allocation, we do have our investments in equity, domestic and international. And over the years, we've been growing our international investments. I think about 10 years ago, we were at about 22% of the portfolio was invested overseas, and today we're about 36%.
Okay.
So we've been gradually growing it up and looking at investing in different asset classes that we actually have. And so far, Alhamdulillah, the overseas investments have actually been yielding slightly better than domestic investments. So what it does, it adds pickup to the return that our members actually get. So the key thing for us is actually to be able to understand the asset classes that we're in and build the capability so that our people invest well, and then work with fund managers, our GPs and so on outside to invest in the right sectors. And what we like at this point of time is looking at the private assets. As I said earlier, about 10%, if you add private equity, real estate and infrastructure, are invested in private markets. We think we could increase that part a bit more because we've been seeing reasonably strong yields over the side over the years. So what we want to do is try to inch up the overseas investments, but not at the expense of investing locally also, because there are good opportunities also here.
I see, indeed. Now, let's take a look at the employers and employees' percentage rates in the country. So it's been considered that in Malaysia it's actually a little bit on the lower side if we compare to other countries in the region. For example, for employees' contribution rates, the percentage in Singapore is, if I'm not mistaken, is 20%. In Thailand, it's up to 15%. So to shore up savings, do you think that perhaps there is a need to look at maybe increasing the percentage rates in Malaysia?
I think you have to look at it in perspective. I think the big issue that we have in Malaysia is what I said earlier, the low wage levels. I would rather that we work on raising wage levels because at 23% deduction of 3,000 is a hell of a lot better than at 1,500.
Definitely, yeah.
And I think there is scope for us to work on that to improve savings in the country itself. The second thing is also we want to empower the member. And what we've been doing is creating mechanisms where the member can do top-ups. And today, under our voluntary access scheme, we go to the member through his employer to encourage them to say, although statutorily you deduct 11%, there's nothing stopping you from putting in 12, 13, 14, 15. And if we are smart at how we do it, we go in and we do it gradually upwards with him. So we come in just before he gets his pay increase and say, add 1% of that to your this, and over time you will reap the value of the compounding effect. We also have voluntary contribution mechanisms where people can take lump sum of money and also put it into EPF. At the moment, the rate is 60,000 max in a year, and we're raising that one up to 100,000. I think by doing a combination of lifting wage levels, encouraging people to take active ownership of their own investments, savings, and then putting in mechanisms to facilitate it, will do a good job at lifting savings in the country.
Indeed, indeed. All right, now back to the EPF's main core function, which is as a retirement fund. So it's undeniable that there are some contributors who actually understand what the EPF is for. It's for their old age. Even some of the poorest contributors have resisted taking out their withdrawing from their accounts, even in times of crisis, because they understand that it's for later on in life when they're going to need it. But also, at the same time, the current unity government has resisted the push for more special withdrawals. Now, for the consumer side, what would be your advice? Why should consumers actually avoid special withdrawals?
I think there's no two ways about it. During the COVID period, we understand why that has facilitated. But we're now in the phase of the economy that is come back, is moving on. And I think we have to go and return back to the point that we contribute back to our savings. We worry going forward because fundamentally Malaysia is an aging nation. And today, if you look at for every one elderly, there's 6 workers. And that balance means that the country's fiscal capacity from its collection is good. But by the time we get to 2060, we'll be down to, for every 1 elderly, there'll be only 2 workers. So the challenge then is the elderly will then have to look after themselves. And there's no other way for them to look after themselves but to have enough built up over time.
Yes.
Hence, the role of EPF is actually to make sure people understand that and encourage them to put money inside and don't take it out unnecessarily along the way. We have vehicles in our system. Account 1 is for your retirement. Account 2 is for scheduled, considered withdrawals like for education, housing, and medical.
Yes.
And even then, if you don't need it, don't take it out. Leave it in and let it compound.
Indeed,
The
indeed.
compounding effect on money is very valuable to build your nest egg.
I see. All right. Well, Dato Sri, it's been wonderful speaking to you, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this week's episode. Thank you so much for making time for us on Money Matters this week.
Thank you very much, Azia.
Thank you. That was the Chief Executive Officer of the Employees Provident Fund, EPF, Dato Sri Amir Hamza Azizan. Thank you so much once again for joining us, and thank you as well for joining us on this week's episode. Don't forget to join us again next week, same place, same time, for more money insights that matter. Till then, I'm Azaria Tagaya. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.